to the river to pray, studying about that.
We're going to continue this morning to talk about prayer. And this morning we're going to talk about the power of prayer. And in starting this conversation, one of the first things I want to point out is that while the power of prayer is supernatural, quite often it will manifest in the natural. The power is supernatural, but it will manifest in the natural. Let me give you an example. Let's say, I spent a little time out in western Kansas, and I would always tell people that were heading west, especially late in the evening, to get gas in Greensburg, because the next gas station was a good ways down the road, and gas stations out that way close. And so I would tell them, get gas. Now imagine you're driving down one of those dark western Kansas roads, and the nearest town is 30 miles in either direction, and your car starts making a noise that you know isn't good. And so you pull off to the side of the road and you pray and you say, God, get me out of this situation. About 2 minutes later, someone pulls over. Turns out this gentleman's a mechanic, and he looks under your hood. He notices that some belts are loose, and he says, okay, I can fix this well enough for you to be able to get to where you're going, but make sure when you get there that you take it in and have it looked at. Now again, the power of prayer is supernatural. It just so happened that just the person that you needed was available at just the time that you needed him. But the way that the problem was fixed in the natural. He was a mechanic, and he did what he normally does. And it's important for us to understand that, because sometimes we can be looking for a supernatural answer, and God is attempting to answer it in the natural. There was this guy, he went hiking in one of our national parks. And after a few hours, he realized that he was lost. And so he got down on his knees and he prayed to God. He said, God, please deliver me from this situation. And he got the feeling that God had heard his prayer and God was going to deliver him. So a few hours later, a couple more hikers come through and they say, are you okay? And he says, yeah, I'm fine. God's going to deliver me. So a couple of days go by and he's getting kind of hungry now, and some guys come by on horseback. They say, are you okay? He says, yeah, I'm just fine. God's going to deliver me. So about a week goes by. He's really hungry now. He's getting weak, and some guys come through on four-wheelers. And they say, are you okay? Do you need some help? He says, no, I'm not. I don't need any help. I'm just fine because God's going to deliver me. Well, he dies. And he goes up to heaven and he says, God, I prayed to you and you promised me that you were going to deliver me from this situation. God, why didn't you deliver me? He said, I sent a hiker, a guy on horseback, and a four-wheeler. What more do you want? Sometimes the answer is natural. We don't need to look for the supernatural. As I said, we're going to talk about the power of prayer this morning. And our text for this morning is going to actually come to you from the Gospel according to Mark. We're going to look at chapter 9, and we will be looking at verses 14 through, give me a minute here. Thank you. 14 through 29. Mark chapter 9, verses 14 through 29. We're going to talk about the power of prayer. Would all who can please stand in reverence to the reading of God's holy word. I'm going to be reading to you from the New International Version, and it reads, when they came to the other disciples, they saw a large crowd around them and the teachers of the law arguing with them. As soon as all the people saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with wonder and ran to greet him. What are you arguing with them about? He asked. A man in the crowd answered, Teacher, I brought you my son who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth, gashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not. You unbelieving generation, Jesus replied. How long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy to me. So they brought him. When the spirit saw Jesus, It immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. Jesus asked the boy's father, "How long has he been like this?" "From childhood," he answered. "It has often thrown him into the fire or water to kill him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." "If you can," said Jesus, "everything is possible for one who believes." Immediately the boy's father exclaimed, "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief." When Jesus saw the crowd was returning to the scene, he rebuked the impure spirit. "You deaf and mute spirit," he said, "I command you to come out of him and never return to him again." The spirit shrieked, convulsed him violently, and he came out. The boy looked so much like a corpse that many said, "He is dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him to his feet, and he stood up. After Jesus had gone indoors, the disciples asked him privately, "Why could we not drive it out?" He replied, "This kind can come out only by prayer." So, let's start by talking about the fact that sometimes in life it would seem that we don't have any other option but prayer. When I was 10 years old, I was growing up in Detroit, and my mother was robbed. And in the process of the robbery, the robber shot her. The bullet went through her left thigh and into her right thigh, and she was able to make it home because it was only about a half a block away. And I remember vividly how much she was bleeding. And I lived in a two-family flat, and the couple upstairs came downstairs so that my grandmother and grandfather could go to the hospital. Because this is the early 80s, and in the early 80s, children weren't allowed to go into hospitals, so I couldn't go. And I remember the lady's name was Mrs. Larry, and I'm 10 years old, and I've just seen my mother carried off on a stretcher into an ambulance, and I don't know what's going on. And I remember asking her, "What can I do?" And I remember saying to me, "Baby, sometimes all that we can do is pray." Now, again, I'm 10. I haven't developed a relationship with God. God is still somewhat of a mystery to me. But all I knew is she was telling me right now that was all we could do. And so we did. And the fact of the matter is that there are times in our lives when we look at a situation and the only thing that we have is prayer. The danger is sometimes the reason that all we have is prayer is because we haven't put prayer in the right place in terms of priority in our life. Let's look at our text this morning. When we look at our text, we see this man that brings his sick son to the disciples and asked for him to be healed. And they can't do it. Now, we can assume that they had been able to do it before, but at this particular time, they are unable to cast out this demon, to cast out this unclean spirit. And so Jesus comes along, he casts the spirit out, and later on they ask him privately, "Why couldn't we do it?" And he says, "Well, this kind can only come out by prayer." The interesting thing is that there are certain things that can be inferred from this story. We know that the man brought his son to the disciples. We know that the disciples could only cast this sort of spirit out by prayer. We know that they couldn't do it. So it can be inferred that whatever they were trying, they didn't pray. Because if the unclean spirit can only be cast out by prayer, and they weren't able to do it, then obviously they weren't praying. And the reason that that's important is because we do that a lot in our own lives. Sometimes we look over the horizon and we see a trial coming. We see difficulties coming in our life. We see oh, there's going to be some trouble, and we will start to figure out, one, how can we avoid it, or if we can't avoid it, how can we get through it? And we'll put together our plan A. And then we'll put together our plan B just in case plan A doesn't work. And for some of us that really like planning, we even have a plan C. And so those trials and those difficulties and those hard times, they come in our life. Plan A doesn't work, and we go to plan B. Plan B doesn't work. So if we have a plan C, we go to plan C. Plan C doesn't work, and then we say the only thing that we have left is prayer. I don't have anything. There's nothing else I can do. I can just pray, which is fine. But you did it the wrong way. Because what should have happened when you were looking and you see these trials coming, before you formulate plan A, B, or C, we should be praying. As we're formulating plan A, we should be praying because maybe God sends us in a different direction than we think we should go. Putting together that plan B or C, we should be praying. So a lot of times what happens, the reason that prayer is all we have left is because we weren't praying through the process. We are God's people, and prayer should be a normal part of our existence. It should be a part of who we are, not just something we do. Amen? Now, I'm not discounting that there are situations when everything's out of control and you only have prayer. That's all I had when I was watching my mother being put into that ambulance. There was nothing else I could do. Prayer was all that I had. But a lot of times we need to make sure that we are praying through situations. We are making prayer a normal part of our daily lives. We are praying in the good as well as the bad. Now, the title for our sermon today, though, is The Power of Prayer. Right now, we've just talked about and looked at what the text shows us about when, and about the fact that sometimes in life all we have is prayer. But Jesus also addressed where that power comes from. You see, you can pray, and it is possible to pray without power. The words are not where the power of prayer is. Remember what we talked about last week. The Pharisee prayed, "Oh God, I thank you that you didn't make me like everybody else. You didn't make me like those evildoers. You didn't make me like those fornicators. You didn't make me like any of those. And God, because you did that, look at how awesome I am. I fast twice a week, and I tithe 1/10 of everything that I give. And you know what, God? I'm really happy you didn't make me like that tax collector." That's a prayer, but there's no power in it. The power is not in the words. The power goes beyond that. When we look at our text today, the man says, "If you can do something, please have pity on me." And Jesus says, if you can, if you believe, anything is possible. And then the man says, "I do believe." But then he says something that seems contradictory. "Help my unbelief." I believe, help my unbelief. Those seem like contradictory statements, but they're not. And in that we see the essence of where the power of prayer comes from. The power of prayer comes from faith. Do we believe? That's the power that is in prayer. And what this man is saying is that he has faith. He does believe. He believes that Jesus can do what he thinks Jesus can do. But there's also that other nagging little thing that happens in the back of our head quite often: doubt. Jesus can do it. But there's this little 3-letter word in the English language that gets us in so much trouble. Jesus can do it. But what if? Maybe there's that doubt that creeps in. And so if the fuel, if the thing that powers our prayer is faith, we also have to understand that sometimes in life, all of us will have those times when we have doubts. Many will go through what is a downright crisis of faith. But understand that even in going through that, there's power in the prayer that God, I'm having these doubts now. Help me in my doubts. Help me in my unbelief. Strengthen my faith. And that is the essence of the power of prayer. It is in the faith. But it also tells us something else. It tells us how powerful the prayer of an individual can be. But imagine this. How powerful is the prayer of a faith community? Joe is in the hospital right now, and I've had a chance to have several conversations with Dennis. I was not here when she was going through what she went through in Colorado, but Dennis has told me that he wholeheartedly believes that the reason that she is even here is because of the prayers that came out of this community. There is power in prayer, and there is great power in the prayer of a praying community. One of my mentors in ministry used to always say that you can tell how powerful a congregation is by how much they pray. He said, much prayer, you have a congregation that prays a lot, then they've got a lot of power. You have a congregation that prays a little, they have a little power. You have a congregation that doesn't pray, they don't have any power. No prayer, no power. And so even when you have that individual that's going through that difficulty, going through that doubt, maybe even going through that crisis of faith, they can be empowered when they have sisters and brothers that come alongside them and will lift them up and will pray with them and will pray for them. Because there is power in that corporate prayer. There is power in the faith of those individuals that are coming together to pray for this person in need. A lot of times, though, we think, okay, what can I do to fix this? How can I work through this? And that's fine, because we do want to try and fix it and work through it. But the question is, in the process of doing that, are you also praying? We have to get away from the attitude of prayer as a last resort. Prayer is the first step. Amen? And so as we continue to grow and as we go through these exciting times that we are going through, we want to become people, we want to become a community of prayer. We want to become prayer warriors. And like I said last week, that doesn't mean that you get up in front of people and you have to say these eloquent prayers. That doesn't mean that you have to pray in front of people at all. Maybe your power is in getting down on your knees at night and interceding on behalf of someone else. No one else knows what's going on, but God still hears that prayer. Maybe it's coming together in a group and praying together. You know what works. The bottom line is, are we a people of prayer? Because we want to be a people of power, and the power is in the faith, and that is where the power of the prayer comes from. Not in the words. I've unfortunately been to many places where people have said these long, eloquent prayers with no power in them. I can remember growing up that there was this one particular minister, and I won't mention his name because this is on tape. Who knows who could see it? But as a teenager, I used to look for, if I had been out Saturday night later than I was supposed to, that was not an excuse not to go to church. Dad was coming over to the house, and there were times when I was asleep, and he got me up, and I was going to church. But if I was in that choir stand getting ready to sing and I saw this person get up to pray, I felt really good because I knew I was going to be able to get a nap in. because he preached his prayers. That's not what it's about, though. It's like the text last week said, it's not about the many words. It's about what's in the heart. And part of what's in the heart is the faith. Do you believe? And understand, I am not convicting anybody for doubts, because we all have had times in our lives when we doubted. But that's when we pray even harder, like the man. I believe, God. Help my unbelief. Help me to have greater faith. And we come together as a community and we lift each other up. That's part of being a part of the Christian family, coming together and lifting each other up. And part of that lifting up is to lift each other up in prayer. Let's come together. Let's be a people of prayer.
Show me the way. Oh, sisters, let's go down. Let's go down.